Hi, it's KrisBlueNZ here. I'm responding to fractal machine and complete rationality on the subject of determinism. I had a few thoughts about this a while back. Basically what I think it comes down to is how far you want to regress in your definition of what can be determined and what can't. In a practical sense, I can see complete rationality's point of view. He gave an example of a pool table where you could possibly measure or measure everything that's going to happen, create an exact model of everything involved in what's going to happen, the pool cue, the cue ball, all the other balls, the cush, all of the different factors that are going to influence what's going to happen. And when you hit that ball, the pool table will behave reasonably accurately according to your model, if the model is accurate enough. And that, in a sense, is kind of determinism. You could, from the point of view that you could say the outcome is known before the action is taken, or the outcome can be calculated independently, or the outcome can be predicted. I think the way determinism is normally understood is more of a infinitely regressed level, depth, where you can say, for example, that every single thing that I say, every little movement in my face, every word I utter, everything can be predetermined because, well, could be considered to be predetermined because it is the result of biological processes, it is the result of interaction of neurons, and so on. And all of those things have known, well, not necessarily actually known in fact, and not necessarily actually predictable or modelable, but conceptually they are, could be modelled, and in that case you can argue from not a very practical point of view, but a theoretical point of view, that everything is deterministic, everything could be considered to be predetermined because everything is the result of what's happened before and the state that all the atoms and molecules are in. Another way to look at this is to say that in theory, but definitely not in practice, at least not with current technology, you could actually simulate the entire universe from the Big Bang onwards if you knew the precise details of everything, every single atom, probably every single subatomic particle, everything like that, and you knew exactly how they interacted and everything else. Then in theory, well, from a theoretical, conceptual point of view, you could emulate or simulate, using a model, the entire universe from the Big Bang, including billions of years, including abiogenesis, evolution, behaviour of every single individual of every species on the planet, behaviour of me right now. In fact, you could even simulate the fact that I'm writing, I'm making this video. Every single precise little detail could be simulated or modelled, and in that sense you could say that reality is deterministic, except I think in a practical sense that isn't very useful, because it would be incredibly difficult and complicated to actually do anything like that. With the concept of computer modelling, I guess it gives us the idea that these kinds of things are possible, but in the real world, computer modelling, for instance, the weather is a good example. The weather is a very complicated combination of a huge number of factors interacting with each other, and it is very difficult to predict. I mean, you know how reliable weather forecasts are. They're not too bad generally, but every once in a while there'll be something totally unpredictable that comes along, like a tornado, for example, and it's kind of the same as the butterfly effect, where a very small change somewhere will be magnified because of conditions and will cause a large change somewhere else. And those things are very difficult to model because it is not practical to model every single atom in the of air in the world and its movement and wind and everything like that. So I think there's, from a practical point of view, there's a dividing line between theoretically predictable or theoretically deterministic or determined, and practically determined. Another example of this is tossing a coin. I made a video about this a while back, but I'll just repeat myself. If it was possible for you to know exactly every single detail of the coin, the thumb, how you move your thumb, how the air currents move and respond to the coin moving through the air and everything like that, in theory you could model it and predict the outcome, whether it's heads or tails. But in practice that's totally impossible, and as long as you make a reasonable go of flipping it with a good spin and so on, it is in practice completely impossible to predict or control which way the coin will land. And to me that's what complete rationality was talking about when you mentioned the pool table example. If you could say that with enough precise information about a limited on a limited scope, presumably you're not talking about things that happen outside the building where the pool table is located, and likewise for the coin toss, you can say that the outcome is could be predetermined or could be modelled or is deterministic or whatever. But in practice there is a practical dividing line between what can reasonably and usefully be modelled and what can only be considered to be deterministic, because it is impractical to model it in its full detail, and that again goes back to my example of the trying to model the entire universe from the Big Bang onwards. Ultimately, I think the question of whether reality is deterministic or not is a bit of a pointless one, really, because it really depends what you mean by deterministic and how far you want to regress in your definition, and whether you're talking about well, yeah, from a completely theoretical point of view, I can see how people can say yes, it's deterministic, because every single behaviour of every like I said, every atom, every subatomic particle, every whatever in the universe is determined by its previous state, if you like. So so you could argue that the whole universe is deterministic, but how practical is that? I mean, could you have predicted all the different animal species that would have evolved, for example? That's just a simple example. A lot of those are pretty bizarre and beyond any reasonable attempt to predict, I would say. So by its sheer vastness and complexity, and the complexity of the interactions between all the particles and everything, I think it's not practical to make any claim like that. So basically I think the question of whether the universe is deterministic is kind of a moot point, really. And the same thing for free will. People say we have free will, but you can also argue that every decision you make was predetermined. It's just really a case of regression, and it's basically the argument disappears up its own fundament, really. But pointless to even think about it, in my opinion. But it's kind of interesting to discuss, and I just thought I'd make a little response to fractalmachine and maybe complete rationality, just to try and point out the issues as I see them, and see if they can sort of agree to disagree. Well, agree that this way of looking at it is fits with both of their opinions, I guess. I'm KrisBlueNZ.